On the southern tip of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, there sits a place that time forgot. The buildings still stand, weathered gray by decades of coastal storms. Rusted equipment leans against collapsing walls. A dock stretches into the cold waters of Port Chatham Bay, waiting for boats that will never return. This is Portlock, and it is one of the only towns in American history where every single resident packed up and left, not because of economics or natural disaster, but because of fear. The story begins innocently enough. In the early 1900s, Portlock thrived as a cannery town and fishing village. Aleut families who had lived in the region for generations mixed with Russian descendants and new settlers drawn by the promise of salmon runs so thick the water seemed to boil with silver. By the 1920s, Portlock had a post office, a school, and a sense of permanence that comes when people build homes with the future in mind. But something changed in the 1930s. It started with the hunters. Men would venture into the densely forested hills behind the village and simply not come back. At first, people assumed the usual culprits of the Alaskan wilderness: brown bears, the treacherous terrain, sudden storms that could disorient even experienced outdoorsmen. Search parties found nothing. No torn clothing, no scattered supplies, no bodies. Just silence among the spruce trees. Then came the bodies in the lagoon. When the missing hunters finally turned up, they appeared in the shallow waters near the cannery, and what the villagers saw shook them to their core. The bodies weren't just dead. They were destroyed, twisted and broken in ways that made no sense, with injuries that seemed beyond the capability of any known animal. Fishermen who had seen men mangled by machinery and attacked by bears said this was different. This was deliberate. The whispers began in earnest. The older Aleut residents had a name for what they believed was responsible: Nantianak. In their language, it meant something close to hairy man, a creature from the old stories that walked upright like a human but stood far taller, covered in dark fur, with strength that could snap a man like driftwood. The Russian families had their own tales of wild men in the forests of their homeland. Now those stories didn't seem quite so mythical. As the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the encounters grew bolder. People reported seeing a massive figure watching the village from the tree line at dusk. Dogs would refuse to enter certain areas of the forest, backing away and whimpering. Equipment at the cannery would be found smashed or thrown impossible distances. A logger was found dead near his worksite, his body showing the now familiar signs of tremendous violence. The thing that haunted Portlock, whatever it was, seemed to be getting closer. Families started leaving quietly at first. A boat would arrive with supplies and depart with passengers who had no intention of returning. Then the trickle became a flood. By the late 1940s, the terror had reached a breaking point. Parents wouldn't let children play outside. Men traveled in groups, armed, looking over their shoulders. The woods that had once provided game and timber now felt like enemy territory. One of the last holdouts was a timber camp worker named Andrew Kamluck. He lived alone at a remote site and was discovered dead in 1949, his body bearing the same catastrophic injuries as the others. His death seemed to settle the matter for the remaining residents. Whatever was out there, whether creature, curse, or something else entirely, they were not going to stay and find out. By 1951, the post office closed its doors for the final time. The last families gathered what they could carry and made for nearby villages like Nanwalek and Port Graham. They left behind homes, businesses, equipment, an entire town's worth of lives abruptly interrupted. And they never came back. Today, Portlock stands frozen in abandonment. The forest slowly reclaims what was built, wrapping buildings in moss and ferns. The few who venture there, usually curiosity seekers and paranormal investigators, report an oppressive atmosphere of unease. Some claim to feel watched. Others speak of finding enormous footprints in the mud or hearing wood knocks echoing from the hills. The rational explanations have been offered, of course. Perhaps a rogue bear with unusual aggression made the area too dangerous. Maybe the economic decline of the cannery industry simply coincided with a series of tragic accidents, and fear did the rest. But those explanations don't quite account for an entire community, people who had survived in the harsh Alaskan wilderness for generations, choosing to walk away from everything they had built. Whatever drove the people from Portlock, it worked. The Nantianak, if it exists, won, and the town remains empty, a monument to the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, in the wild places of the world, we are not always at the top of the food chain.